So today we're going to dive into one of the most unbelievable economic collapses in modern history, Venezuela. I mean, it's a wild story about a country that was basically handed a golden ticket. We're talking unimaginable wealth, and somehow it all went horribly wrong. Let's figure out how.
And really, this is the central mystery we're trying to solve. How on earth does a nation sitting on top of more oil than Saudi Arabia, literally the largest reserves on the planet, end up in a state of absolute chaos? It just doesn't seem to make any sense.
And before we even touch the economics, just look at this number. Over 8 million people. That's more than a quarter of the entire population that has literally packed up and left. This isn't just about money or politics. This is a human catastrophe on a scale that's hard to even comprehend. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we first have to understand the massive contradiction at the very heart of Venezuela's story. I mean, just look at how crazy this is. On one side, you've got the world's #1 largest proven oil reserves. This was a country so rich back in the 70s, people called it Saudi Venezuela, and its middle class would just fly to Miami for weekend shopping sprees. Now look at the other side, an 80% crash in GDP. More than 82% of the population plunged into poverty, and just empty shelves everywhere. No food, no medicine, nothing. To really wrap your head around the kind of hyperinflation we're talking about, check out this analogy. Imagine taking the old 100 Boulevard notebooks from about 20 years ago and just stacking them up and up until you filled 40 entire football stadiums with cash. All of that money would buy you one single hamburger. And that's it. No fries, no Coke. That's how completely worthless the currency became. So, where did this all start? Well, we have to go right back to the beginning, to the very thing that was both its greatest blessing and its ultimate curse, the discovery of oil. You know, Venezuela's rise was just astronomical. They find oil in 1914. By the 1920s, they're already the second biggest producer in the entire world. Then they help create OPEC. And then the 1970s hit, and a couple of global oil shocks send prices into the stratosphere, and an absolute tidal wave of cash just floods the country. But that tidal wave of money, it brought a kind of sickness with it, an economic problem that is absolutely key to this whole story. It's got a name: Dutch disease. Okay, let's break down how this works, because it's really important. First, you're exporting so much oil that you're swimming in US dollars. That makes your local currency, the bolivar, incredibly strong. Now, because your currency is so strong, anything you make in Venezuela is suddenly way too expensive for anyone else to buy. But at the same time, imported stuff becomes dirt cheap for you. So why would you bother farming or making things at home when you can just buy it all from abroad for less? And slowly but surely, every other part of your economy just withers away. So now the country has basically lost its economic immune system. It was all oil, all the time. So when that oil party finally sputtered out in the 1980s, the crash was just devastating. And right here, this was the trigger. In the early 80s, oil prices were flying high, but by 1986, they just fell off a cliff, dropping by more than 70%. For a country that was paying for literally everything with oil money, this was a knockout punch. And what came next was just a domino effect of disasters. The government had borrowed billions, thinking the good times would never end, and now they were totally broke. They had to devalue the currency on what people still call Black Friday. They tried these harsh economic reforms that totally backfired, the whole banking system imploded, and corruption was just out of control. For 15 straight years, the economy went absolutely nowhere. People were fed up. They were desperate for a change, for anyone who promised to fix this mess. And that, of course, set the stage for one of the most polarizing figures of our time, Hugo Chavez. And just as he came to power, as if by fate, another massive oil boom was about to begin. So Chavez kicks off his Bolivarian revolution. He goes on this massive nationalization campaign, taking over pretty much everything. Banks, telecom, you name it. He takes total control of the state oil company, PDVSA. And get this, after a big strike, he goes on national television and personally fires almost 20,000 of its most experienced workers. He then takes all that new oil money and pours it into huge social programs, while locking down the economy with strict price and currency controls. The government basically made it cheaper to borrow money than the rate of inflation. I mean, just think about that. You were literally getting paid to go into debt. It sparked this insane consumer spending spree. People were buying cars not even to drive them, but just as an investment. And this led to this bizarre cultural moment where Venezuela became a world capital for cosmetic surgery, because people saw it as a better investment in their future than, a savings account.
But this boom, just like the one before it, was built on a house of cards. When Chavez died in 2013, his hand-picked successor, Nicolas Maduro, took charge. And almost right away, the music stopped.
This chart right here pretty much says it all. In the Chavez era, you had booming oil prices, over $100 a barrel. That paid for massive spending. Imports were everywhere, and poverty actually went down. Then comes the Maduro era. Oil prices crash. There's no money left to pay for anything, so the government's only move is to just print money like there's no tomorrow. The result? Absolute hyperinflation and total chaos. And this is what hyperinflation actually looks like in practice. To deal with prices getting so ridiculously high, the government just kept relaunching the currency and chopping off zeros. First, they cut 3 zeros. A few years later, they cut 5 more. Then a couple years after that, they cut another 6. In total, they erased 14 zeros from their own money. It would be funny if it wasn't so incredibly tragic. For regular people, daily life just became a waking nightmare. You had to shop on specific days based on your ID number and use a fingerprint scanner just to get into the supermarket. The lines for gasoline, which was practically free, could last for days on end. The power grid collapsed, water stopped running, and, like we saw at the beginning, millions just decided they couldn't take it anymore and left. So when you look back at all of this, what's the big takeaway? What can we possibly learn from such a spectacular failure? Well, it seems like the wealth itself was the poison. See, in a normal country, if your government is corrupt or makes terrible decisions, you feel the pain right away, and that forces a change. But in Venezuela, that endless river of oil money was like a powerful painkiller. It completely masked the symptoms of a deadly disease for decades, letting all these deep problems fester and grow until the entire system just rotted from the inside out. And maybe nobody saw this coming clearer than one of the very men who started it all. This quote is from Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso. He was one of the guys who co-founded OPEC. And decades ago, he said this. He called oil the devil's excrement. I mean, what a chillingly accurate prediction. And that really just leaves us with one last thing to think about. Venezuela had all the buried treasure a country could ever dream of, and it brought them nothing but ruin. It really makes you question what a nation's true wealth is. Maybe it's not what's buried under the ground at all.